Welcome to the Mild Opinion Podcast, Episode 2. I'm Luke.
I'm Logan.
And today we're going to be talking about director Robert Eggers.
Where do you want to start?
Well, we can start off, I guess, from his most recent thing. Is people probably know him most now by Nosferatu, because it was definitely, I would say, probably his most advertised project to date.
Yeah,
definitely
sure.
the biggest cast and probably the biggest production, like cost and location-wise, and also it just has a really, really stacked cast.
Yeah, I think coming into it, if you know anything about film or anything like that, a lot of people were excited about it just because it was an idea that's been touched on, pretty simple, you know what I mean, vampire film, Dracula, so on and so forth, but the idea that it was a remake, or not even a remake, more like a reimagining of Nosferatu, the all-time classic, really monumental film in general, and for him to take it and put his own spin and ideas to it and everything, it's kind of a neat thing. And also, I mean, even from the beginning, the trailers for it and stuff like that looked fantastic. It looks like a Robert Eggers movie.
Sure. And that's what made you and I initially excited for it, like 6 months before it came out.
Yep.
Because we've seen The Lighthouse and The Witch, and then since we just watched The Northman, we're now all caught up on his films. And personally, for me, I feel like honestly, in my own personal ranking, Nosferatu kind of came relatively lower than the others, but it's definitely a movie where I watched it, and since I've thought about it, I kind of feel like upon even like a second rewatch or just even more time, it'll kind of grow on me, because even since we just watched The Northman, as I've been thinking about it and such, I've just started to kind of appreciate it more and more, because while we were watching it, I felt like for the first half at least, I was kind of hit or miss on it, and then it was one of those movies where about halfway through everything kind of starts to make sense and fall into place with what's trying to be accomplished. But yeah, in terms of where I stand on each of his movies, I would probably right now rank Nosferatu as my least favorite of his, and then I'd probably, in descending order, follow that up with The Northman, and then The Witch, and then The Lighthouse.
Yeah. I think, for me personally, I liked Nosferatu quite a bit. I thought it was an amazing movie. And also, I think, just in general, all of his movies that he has made, I'm a big fan of. So, even the one that's the worst is better than your average movie for me.
And I'm not saying like I dislike Nosferatu. Yeah. I just feel like I need more time or a second rewatch to appreciate it a bit more.
But for me personally, I would say Nosferatu for me. And I mean, there's only 4 movies total out of his to pick out of, but it's kind of middle of the pack. It could go probably about third for me. I would say my favorite movie of his is definitely The Lighthouse. After that, probably Northman, then Nosferatu, then The Witch.
Wow.
And that's just, I think, like I said, all of them were great. The thing with Nosferatu for me personally is that it's at first, when I first watched it, towards the end of the movie, I was kind of like, alright, like, it wrapped up in kind of a strange way, but also we kind of knew, based off of the story, that was what was going to happen anyway. And, like, the more that I had time to think about it, and also seeing what, like, the cast had said about it and stuff afterwards, and interviews and everything, it kind of made more sense to me that, like, this is a movie about a vampire, and this is a movie about, him terrorizing other people and stuff like that. It's a vampire movie. Sure. But as much as it is a vampire movie, I also feel that you can kind of see, like, different aspects of it with, like, the love and everything that happened in it. Like, it was kind of like a tortured romance kind of movie as well.
And it was it's the whole thing is that, like, love triangle. It's a very, like, bizarre and tragic love triangle, but, like, between like I don't remember all their characters' names, but Lily Rose Depp, Nicholas Hoult, and of course Count Orlok. And it was after we talked about it too, you were talking about how like it's kind of that like she has this guy who like loves her and all that, but he can't get past or like even buy into the fact that she's saying there's this other part of her that she can't really understand, and that's why like Count Orlok is able to like spin his web of like getting back to her and like making her, despite all the terrible things that he does throughout the movie, like want him over her husband.
Yeah. Well, and I mean, obviously, if you've seen the movie, if you've seen Count Orlok and everything like that, a lot of people afterwards who'd seen it were talking about like, oh yeah, but like, how could she have, even ever wanted him and all that stuff, like in general, and because he's a disgusting vampire, he looks whatever, but it's not about that. It's about like, and they've explained, the cast has also explained this as well, that like it's not necessarily like she's like wants him consciously. It's like a feeling that she cannot shake. He's always there in her mind, in her thoughts at all times. And it's like a lust. It's like her guilty pleasure. Mm-hmm. She loves her husband. She wants her husband. Count Orlok is just like something, a feeling bearing over her that she cannot get rid of. And that's just part of it.
Yeah. And, I think too that this movie, at least to me, by like how I perceived it, if I was new to Robert Eggers, I feel like it's the easiest one of his films to kind of like, I don't want to say follow, but it's kind of the easiest one to like get behind and like understand what is trying to be accomplished with it. And I thought that was interesting because with a lot of his films, he has, as we've talked about before, he has like these really in-depth supernatural or like paranormal qualities to very historical settings. And with this movie, I really felt like it was a good balance of like Count Orlok is a known person among these people, but then it's like there's something wrong from the first time they even mention him because it plays that like eerie organ music, and upon meeting him there's just something off, and that's when Eggers' style really starts to come through with like the very atmospheric and like unsaturated dark shots start coming in. Is like right when Nicholas Hoult starts his journey there, and I think that's just kind of one of Eggers' trademarks with kind of these very symbolic evils, as he likes, or like supernatural forces, as he likes to use his visual camera work and color and setting to showcase what each of them truly mean and how they would come across.
Yeah, I agree, and I think that it's like, well, Eggers, his style is, fantastic, and I think that it's important to like put together as you watch more of his movies that the way that he films certain shots or the way that it all comes together in post and everything like that, like it could just be of anything. It could be of like a tree line, it could be of a small cottage, it could be of anything, and it's just in the dark, in the snow, whatever, and just the unsaturated colors and things like that.
It's very like eerily atmospheric, like, and you can tell they play with some like zoom angling and stuff. So like something I started to pick up on, especially when we were watching The Northman, is there's this shot in the movie Jaws where it closes in really close on the main character's face, but it looks like the background gets farther away, and it's done by zooming in with a camera while you're like moving further away to kind of screw with the perspective. And I feel like while we're watching Eggers' movies, there's a lot of aspects of that with like the background kind of morphing to sort of what the main character might be experiencing, or like just sort of that atmospheric terror that comes with, especially with Nosferatu.
Yeah.
But also just with, I think The Witch did it, but I haven't seen that in longer. but it was definitely the most prevalent in Nosferatu.
Yeah. Well, and also with Eggers and his style and everything, obviously we've talked about the darkness and the atmosphere and all that stuff, which is like his big staple thing. But like the themes that he goes for, and how he's talked about this before himself in interviews and stuff. He doesn't want anything modern. He doesn't want to do that. He doesn't. That's not his style at all.
Mm.
He likes, older settings with more so like fairy tale like aspects or folklore and stuff like that. And also he uses a lot of paranormal stuff, supernatural stuff, different ideas, very spiritual ideas. And I think that's, for a certain, if you're into those kinds of movies, he really does a very good job of that. And even though not, like a lot of his movies and stuff deal with like supernatural stuff and the dark stuff and all that, it's not necessarily just straight up like horror movies or anything like that. Like there are aspects of it that are like that, but his goal is not to just make, oh yeah, here's a scary movie. There's like things like the more you look into it, the more you think about it, like it sits with you because it tells a whole story about like the lives of the people involved around whatever horrible thing is happening, stuff like that, rather than just being like, oh yeah, here's this, be scared. And I think that's really neat.
Yeah, and it's also like how people in that time period that he chooses might react to certain things. So not so much in the Lighthouse, because Lighthouse, I feel like what's going on, the whole movie would be taken in so many different ways, no matter what time period you're watching.
Mm-hmm.
But with like the witch, there's the whole thing of that. I think it's the dad in that movie is very like skeptical that there's things going on the whole time, but that gets to a point where he's like, there's very clearly evil at work here. And then in the Northman, it's so deep into that Norse mythology that all of the supernatural elements in it seem to be just kind of accepted by the characters in the movie, good and bad. Like there's not really a level of disbelief among anybody that's going on. They all take the same symbolism and understand it and understand like the familial bloodline. And then with Nosferatu, it's very much those worlds clashing, because it's like Lily Rose Depp's character knows that there's something out here because she's experienced it firsthand, but then the people who can't get behind it are her husband and their family friends just don't understand what's going on until they finally start to accept like there is a dark evil coming for us.
Yes, and I think that is one of the things that Eggers does so well, just as, a director and, just going into these films, the amount of effort that he puts into finding a story that he wants to do and then putting the story together, making sure it's all historically accurate or would align with how the people of the time in whatever film or story that he's writing, like it all is like one coherent thing, and it all makes sense. It's all accurate with like similar ideas that they would have back in those times and everything like that. He's not picking out these random ideas and then going out on a limb thinking like, oh yeah, like this would make for a good movie. You know what I mean? Like he is doing the research, he's doing the work, and
he's extremely invested in not only like coming up with the idea, but understanding like the extent to which he could flesh it out and I guess putting that into practice with like, we've learned, he got his start in like production and arts and the art side of things, so like costume design and such, and the more you pay attention to that in his films, the more it feels authentic and it feels like you're really in that setting, which is a testament to what he's trying to accomplish there.
Yes, and as he is very good at that. And also I feel like when you watch his movies and you pay attention to the details and then you look into it a little bit more and you realize how much effort he puts into these things, like the costume design and all that, like you were talking about, you can kind of realize that he's not just like one of those directors that come out with movie after movie after movie after movie and they're like, oh yeah, like this will make me money, this will make me money, whatever. It feels like in the very short span of movies that he's had, every movie that he does feels like his own passion project. It's not just something that he's putting out there to make money off of. He's doing it and working hard on it because it feels like he wants to. It's not just for, money or fame or whatever. It's like something that he actually wants to do. He wants to be working on it. And I feel like another thing that you can kind of, I guess, gather from that is like you see like the recurring actors and stuff in his films, like Willem Dafoe, Anya Taylor-Joy was in a couple of them.
Ralph Ineson.
I feel like
there's more.
Yeah.
But I feel like those are the ones that jump out the most, especially because Willem Dafoe and Anya Taylor-Joy have been at like the forefront of when they show up the most. But at the same time, he's only 4 films deep. Each of them, they kind of are identifiable as a Robert Eggers film, but they're also incredibly distinct from one another. And for it being 4 movies, he's already putting together bombshell casts. People are starting to know how to identify his work, which is why I feel like Nosferatu started to get so much attention and still has people talking about it. And will probably bring more people to his previous movies. And it's not like he wasn't known before, but he's definitely, as each project is coming, he's starting to become somebody who will have the reputation of studios coming to him, ask him what he has, and being able to just rattle off an idea that he wants to pursue next.
And I'm hoping as he gets more popular and more famous, more well known for his work and stuff, like things like that, that if studios do come to him wanting to work with him and stuff like that, and as he can maybe, possibly pump out more movies and stuff like that, that he doesn't lose sight of, where he's at like now and what he's been producing now and putting out now. Because like right now it just feels like I said, everything's like a passion project. Everything is good. He goes through it, fleshes out all the details, make sure that everything's accurate and how he wants it to be and how it should be. And I hope that as he gains more traction, that he does not lose sight of that with, bigger crews, bigger studios, stuff like that. Like I don't want what he does best to get lost just because of his growth as a director.
Yeah, and hopefully I feel like it's an interesting thing to say about him that he has like probably some of the weirdest movies that I have ever seen and that most people would ever see. And I feel like Nosferatu even is the most streamlined of that, and even that was like that was a very hard introduction to him if you've never seen his stuff before. So if you were like a first time viewer who after Nosferatu were like, I'm gonna go watch his other stuff, I don't even know what would be the best place to start after that. I probably wouldn't say the Northman, because I felt like that one, in terms of the depth and the style and how much intricacy and mythology is put into that was one where it took me a decent amount of the watch through before I was starting to be able to be like, okay, I'm not necessarily supposed to understand all of this.
The Northman kind of seemed more of a slow burn. You kind of feel it out more as you go. I would say, if you want any recommendations as watch order, because I mean, none of it's cohesive. You don't have to watch any of it in a certain order. But getting into Eggers, if you want to watch his movies so far, I think the best way to understand his style and stuff like that is start out with Nosferatu, then go to The Witch, because both of those are pretty easily understandable stories.
Well, also, like, Nosferatu kind of gives you an idea of, like, this is his most recent thing, so... And hopefully, it's not, like, a trend of him becoming more audience-based. It doesn't feel like it while we're watching the movie. No. It's still, like, very much a distinct thing that you won't see anything like. But with, like, The Witch, that's, like, his fundamental style of horror, too, and, like, where you see those roots of his current style start to, like, take shape.
But yeah, I think Nosferatu and the Witch, but either of which would be a good place to start. Northman, it's the ideas get a little bit different, a little bit more out there. Also, it's not as clear cut as the story goes on. Like, you know what's happening, but it's not like, it doesn't throw it in your face and tell you exactly what's going on. And then, lastly, you got the Lighthouse, which is my favorite of his movies.
Me too.
But there's just no clear direction as to what's going on for most of the movie. And also, I mean, and not saying that in a bad way, it was fantastic.
But probably I think probably the weirdest movie of his. The concepts and ideas in that movie are wild. Yeah.
But they're so interesting, and the way that it's shot, just Willem Dafoe and Robert Pattinson, fantastic.
Mm-hmm. From the opening shot of them two in that movie, it's when they both arrive at the lighthouse too. It's literally just them standing right in front of the lighthouse, ready to enter it, and it already you're watching it and you're like, this is such a interesting look to it. It's hard to even describe. Mm-hmm. It's just, it jumps out at you as this looks different. And then with that movie, the further you dive into it, you kind of start to see where it might be going, but it doesn't necessarily offer that much context as what this means. It's something too where you can watch it and it can mean something different to everybody and what they think was going on the whole time.
And that is the thing about the Lighthouse that I think I enjoyed the most, is that it can mean different things to different people, but also it's not one of those things where it's oh, well, the story doesn't make sense. Why would you want to watch that? You will be invested the entire time.
Mm-hmm. It's very captivating, and it's one of those movies where it's purely escalation of the tensity and the mystery of what's going on, and the fact that it's just the two of them, Robert Pattinson and Willem Dafoe. I felt like when I watched it, I think we watched it together the first time, right? Mm-hmm. I watched it and I was like, how have I not heard more about these two's performance in this movie? It's insane.
And even as you watch them interact from the beginning of the movie, because like you said, the tensity and what's going on builds up more and more, and it increases as you go. But even from the beginning of the movie, when they're just, they first get there, they're kind of fleshing things out with each other and stuff like that, doing just, the regular chores and stuff like that as the movie starts with the lighthouse and everything like that. Even that is so interesting because in little small spots, it starts out slow, but you see, all right, this isn't exactly normal. And then it just keeps growing from there, which is what makes it so interesting. Mm-hmm. And then you get to the end of the movie, and the climax happens. Everything that you've been waiting to see starts to wrap up, but it doesn't wrap up with "here's the end, this is it." The movie ends, and you're left with, your thoughts.
Yeah, and if I guess if you haven't looked at a lot of Greek mythology or wherever that one thing is I was talking to you about, it seems that this movie has a lot of ties to metaphors for certain mythologies and myths, but that might not be necessarily evident. And I honestly think if I watched that movie and automatically was well, that's clearly this, I probably wouldn't have enjoyed it as much, because it just kind of added to that mystery and that feeling of this can mean whatever you want. And even if you look into the story of what the idea of the lighthouse came from, or some of the themes or concepts that are implemented in that, it doesn't take away from the viewing experience of it. It's just purely bizarre and very different from anything that you'll ever see.
Yes, and just you don't really understand any of it that well, but from what you do understand in the world building in that movie, and the setting and what's going on, storyline wise and everything, the way that the movie ends is fantastic. It's not necessarily, you watch it, you get all the whole storyline through, and then you get like a good closure, but it leaves you with everything that it needs to leave you with. Nothing less and nothing more. It's just that is the end of the movie, and that's what you get out of it. And honestly, I think that's a very good way to describe how Eggers ends most of his movies, honestly. Everything that I've seen, very concise. It doesn't give you a lot about what happens afterwards, also it doesn't leave you wanting, any kind of like solid, here's, so-and-so, and they live out the rest of their days. You know what I mean? Like, his movies never end like that. And it leaves you with, this is where the storyline is done, and this is it. It doesn't offer any explanation. And that's, honestly, all of his movies are like that. And I think that's part of what makes his movies so good as well, is because whenever you finish one of his movies, you think about it. And those are the best kinds of movies. I mean, don't get me wrong. A good storyline with nice closure and stuff like that, can't go wrong with that. But when I watch an Eggers movie and I'm thinking about it for, days afterwards because of how just good it was, that's like, I love that.
Yeah. And, yeah, like you said, his movies don't necessarily have just like a huge... I mean, the conclusions to each of his movies are pretty, like, dramatic in their own ways, but at the very, very ending, it's not like, his main characters or the other people involved necessarily, like, get some perfect ending or, like, the ultimate resolution to what happens with them, but it ends in such a way where it gives you everything that you needed to know and to see about each of the characters. And especially with Nosferatu, it kind of ends with, not really a big focus on, like, any one particular character. Well, obviously, like, Count Orlok, it's, like, it's the story of him, like, but with the character that it ends on in, like, the Lighthouse and the Witch and the Northman, it's all very much focused on, like, it's the end of their story. And that's where it ends. So I think in watching each of these, you do get a sense of that, like, real down-to-earth Eggers style of, like, there doesn't need to be happiness here. It's just done.
And another thing, I feel like that goes back to Eggers' focus on, like, folklore and stuff like that, is that it's very much, like you said, it focuses on, like, one character, like the main character. This is their story, this is what you know about them, this is what you've seen, and this is the end of their story. And I think that goes back to, like, folklore and old epics and stuff like that, is you follow one character, you know their story, and then that's it. Because, I mean, in, like, new media and stuff like that, new, movies, shows, all that, you meet the main character and all these side characters who all have their own stories and this, that, and the other. And it is true for his movies. That's how it works. You get background and information and stuff like that. But with, like, folklore and stuff like that, and, like, the stuff that he puts a large emphasis on, or, like, a large, basis for his movies on, you follow, the character and what they do, and that's, just like in, like, Gilgamesh and stuff like that. You follow the character, you go through their story, and when their story ends, it's done.
Yep. And so, all of this that we've said about his style and how his movies end, I'm curious to see, like, what he'll do as he continues here, because he's not gonna stop making movies like this. So we know that his next movie has it been confirmed, or?
Yes, it has been confirmed that his next movie will be Werewolf, and it will be, I think it's supposed to be coming out in 2026, like mid to late 2026.
Yeah, and from what you told me about, because you seem to have seen a little bit more about this. It's going to be following kind of werewolf legends and sort of mythos from 1700s.
Yes, it's going to be based on different accounts and stories of werewolves in the 1700s, and it'll be following, I'm assuming, well, I mean, very little information at this point, but I'm assuming, hopefully, it'll be following whoever is the werewolf themselves, or someone,
Like someone hunting werewolves.
Yeah.
It could be both.
Anything of the sort, someone getting terrorized by the werewolf. But either way, just another very interesting folklore-based, history-based.
And he's going to take that and make it his own. It's not going to be like the other werewolf movies you've seen. And you can look at that with like Nosferatu. It's not like his original idea, but he definitely really heavily leaned into the idea of Count Orlok not being like the mainstream vampire you see today, being like a good-looking guy or a really like captivating person, just a very demonic presence, and with some elements of like plague doctor things going on with like the rats and people thinking they've been cursed. So with whatever comes next in this werewolf film that he's going to make, he's going to make it his own, and it's going to be distinct from other things that might have been burnt out in other topics.
And I'm very excited to see what he does with a werewolf idea, solely because I feel like a lot of times, especially in more recent werewolf kind of movies and shows and stuff like that, most of the time they all look kind of not great.
Yeah.
And I feel like with how much he pays close attention to like detail and costume design, and especially with the way that he shoots his movies and stuff, I think that he will knock that out of the park with the look of the werewolf and the setting for it and what's going on with it. I think that Eggers is the perfect person to absolutely nail a werewolf movie.
Yeah, and hopefully it's not too, predictable of like the concept of a werewolf. That I feel like he'll find a good sort of spin or balance to put on it, not just like, oh, when it's the full moon I'll turn into a werewolf, but kind of like have some unique laws of that world that he's going to build. And I need to look more into some of his movies and like where they came from and like the ideas and symbolism behind them, but I'm sure he'll be deep diving on traditional werewolf myths and even maybe like the first stories of like werewolves and where that idea comes from, and sort of all the different iterations and variations that have shown up through popular folklores throughout the years.
And while I do think that he will do a very good job in the horror aspect of, a werewolf movie, I'm very, very curious to see what he's going to do storyline-wise, because with most of his movies, there's always more to it than just, like I said earlier, here's a scary thing, it's a horror movie. You know what I mean? Like, I want to see what ideas in this movie he will bring, because I feel like this one will be, I think, the most difficult to find an aspect of it that's not just pure horror scary movie.
And that's why I think what you said, I think it'd be very interesting to get that like first-hand perspective of the werewolf and see what he does with that, like, because I feel like he'll be very well able to show that perspective from whoever the character is that will be werewolf, or other people who are werewolf in this movie. It's going to be something where he shows a unique experience of that. And this goes into one other thing I was thinking about while watching his movies. I feel like he's very heavily invested in the dialogue being very believable as to what you think somebody would say or do or react in a certain time period that his films take place. But I think what resonates with me, and probably with you to a certain extent, the most is his visual storytelling.
Yes.
Is not when somebody's giving some long explanation to something, because while I think he does great at that, the most context I feel like that you get is from when somebody is in an action or somebody's reacting to something, and especially with the casts that he has enlisted for each of his movies, he's picking some truly outstanding actors who are able to express these complex and very unnatural situations that they're in. And so I was especially thinking this when we watched The Northman, that a lot of the beginning is very heavily dialogue based. So some of the supernatural elements that you see early on that are very dialogue heavy don't necessarily resonate as much, but then in the middle of the movie, once you start to follow the main character on his journey, you start to kind of not even understand necessarily the mythos. Well, I mean, you understand it more as you watch, but you kind of understand how important it is to each of the characters in each movie to get the bottom of the mystery or to achieve their goal based on how you see them move, act, react, and just what they do in each scenario.
Yeah, I completely agree. And with, the ability of the actors and actresses that he enlists for his movies and stuff like that, it's very easy for them to portray the feeling that Eggers wants you to get out of the certain scenarios, and just the weird different kind of storylines they tell and stuff like that. Like, he gets these actors and actresses to portray that without directly saying, oh yes, this is what's happening, this is how you should feel. As you watch, you feel like that you're almost there with them, feeling the same thing as they are, which is what's so good about it. That combined with his, fantastic world building and time, era, all that, everything that he does with the setting is just so good that it really just draws you in and makes you feel like you're there with them in the movie. And I think that is what makes it so interesting, because it's more of, like a feeling than it is just like an understanding of what all's happening. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. So I think for both of us, Robert Eggers is definitely just a director that stood out to us quite a bit, and it's good that we've caught him in broad terms early in his career because of how distinct it is, and to see how that's going to evolve over the years as already a wildly successful director, but as one that is going to grow. He's certainly going to be one we're going to keep our eye on.
I do 100% agree, and I also as I've told you before, I think he is one to watch. I think he is only going to continue to get better, hopefully. And as far as directors go, as of right now, I think I am most excited about him as a director compared to anyone else. I mean, there's obviously the standouts, Quentin Tarantino, anyone of that sort. They're, A-list, top-tier directors. But as far as, how excited I am about movies, if I hear that a Robert Eggers movie's coming out, I'm going to be excited.
Because it'll be different from everything else that comes out around that time.
Yep.
Well, this has been episode 2 of the Mild Opinion Podcast, and thank you for listening.